Mr Deputy Speaker, to follow the Shadow Minister, because he's a member of the House who's been here now for a year and somebody who I get on with personally out of this chamber incredibly well. But he is a Shadow Scotland Office Minister, and in that 10-minute speech he just gave on strengthening the Union, there was not one single policy put forward from the Shadow Minister on how he sees the Union being strengthened. Instead, we were treated to a 10-minute anti-independence diatribe. I'll give way to him shortly, but I want to get into the crux of what I'm going to say first. I will be generous, though, to the Minister who will be summing up, the honourable gentleman for Pudsey, who I do congratulate on his appointment to the Defence Procurement portfolio. He's been a kind and honourable member in the time I've been here, and I certainly wish him well as my party's defence spokesperson. But I'm afraid to say that the opening speech made by the Constitution Minister in the Cabinet Office was something else. I don't think I've heard a speech that has been delivered through such rose-tinted land of hope and glory lenses than I heard at the opening of this debate earlier on today, despite several giving a strong running to beat her in that as the debate went on. Such an incredible lack of self-awareness to bring forward a debate on strengthening the Union the day before the UK Government takes the Scottish Parliament to the UK Supreme Court. But a lack of self-awareness is only one of the things that plagues politics in this place, and I'll come to the others later. But I said I'd come back to the Shadow Minister.
Well, I thank my fellow member for Glasgow for giving way. And I would have to put to him that the fundamental ethos of my argument was based on the idea that the British state can marshal far greater fiscal and monetary benefits for the quality of life of the people of Scotland. That underpinned what I was arguing for in the spirit of 1945. Would he agree that is a fair analysis?
I agree that he believes that to be the case. I'm afraid that I don't believe that to be the case, because, like him, I see too many injustices delivered by the British state through the welfare system, the rape clause, the waspy women, who I'm sure he meets many of in his own constituency. So I'm afraid I don't buy his argument. I just think it's a shame he has become so convinced by it. But, Mr Deputy Speaker, no, I won't. I want to make some progress. I want to quote a former Glasgow member, independent Labour Party member. He was the Member of Parliament for Bridgeton, the late great Jimmy Maxton, born in my own constituency of Pollokshaws. And he said in a speech he gave, "I believe we can achieve more for the Scottish people within 5 years of a Scottish Parliament than 25 to 30 years of the heartbreaking struggle in the British House of Commons." Well, if only some of that thought would plague the benches to my right, rather than the thoughts that plague them right now. Is it any wonder that Winston Churchill described Maxton as possibly the greatest parliamentarian of his day? Indeed, that quote from Maxton is, I believe, the bar by which we should measure the progress of Scotland's Parliament. And is it any wonder, with tremendous foresight that he became famous for, that Sir George Reid would use that quote in his maiden speech to this House on the 15th of March 1974, 5 years before Maxton's nephew would enter the House as the Member of Parliament for Cathcart, which is now my constituency, succeeding it as Glasgow South, and I understand he takes a seat now in the other place. But when Sir George Reid gave that maiden speech, and as I was reading this earlier, Mr Deputy Speaker, I was interrupted by his successor who occupies that seat at the moment. He gave in his speech the quote of Clackmannanshire, which we discussed. The quote of Clackmannanshire, the slogan rather of Clackmannanshire at the time was "Look about you." Changed in 2007, I forget what it was changed to, but I know it's not as good as "Look about you." And what "Look about you" means is look around you and face the facts. Well, surely we could do with following that old Clackmannanshire slogan as we debate strengthening the Union, in fact, as we debate anything in this House today. Instead, I'm afraid to say, Well, how could I say no after quoting his constituency slogan?
I thank the honourable gentleman for quoting my constituency and quoting what was, obviously used to be its phrase, look about you. I would just say on that point, should he not look about himself and realise that Clyde Manager voted in a majority to remain in the United Kingdom, and he should look about himself and see the facts that Scotland wants into the United Kingdom, not out with the SNP.
I'm willing to accept that entirely, but that doesn't mean I can stop arguing for it. Indeed, it was his party leader who said it was legitimate, even honourable, for the Scottish National Party to continue advocating for Scotland's independence, and that is what I intend to do. Yeah. So I hope to turn his constituency around. I note he doesn't mention the result of the EU referendum in his own constituency, but the point that George Reid was making then as now is that facts change. People are entitled to move. But I want to come back to the point he was making about the facts. That's what we should be looking at. Rather than allowing ourselves to be plagued by this positioning in trenches that poisons our politics, it breeds cynicism, which is the least healthy thing we can have in our politics. I think it was Mandela himself who noted that cynicism must be opposed at all times. And I think there's a real danger we actually go back to a poisonous period in this chamber in 1945, at the election of the first ever SNP Member of Parliament, Robert McIntyre, who won his seat in a by-election in Motherwell. And it took him several days to take his oath, Mr Deputy Speaker, because there were no two members who would stand at the bar of this House and allow him to approach the table in order to take his oath. And I don't want to see us return to that any time soon. We're constantly being told, indeed the Shadow Secretary said it earlier, that we are manufacturing grievances. I have much to be aggrieved about, Mr Deputy Speaker. I wish the Shadow Secretary could be aggrieved about them with me. If that makes me a grievance monger, then frankly that's what my job is here to be. I am aggrieved by many of the things this government does, some of which have been adumbrated by my honourable friend from Glasgow Central, on the issue of drug consumption rooms, on the awful, awful immigration cases that all of us see coming through our constituency surgeries, of the really dreadful and quite regressive welfare measures that we see impacting on your constituents. You better believe it, I'm aggrieved about many of those things. Certainly.
I'm grateful to the honourable gentleman for giving way, and he's right to point out grievances that he has with this government. Is it therefore fair that those of us on these benches and Scottish Conservatives around Scotland can also have grievances against his own party, who have been in power in Scotland for 11 years? We've seen educational standards dropping. We've seen mergers of police and fire services, which many people in more rural constituencies are against. And we've also seen, a number of problems with our NHS services. So we are entitled to raise these grievances, as is he in this place.
Well, the honourable gentleman is in a particularly unique position, including the honourable gentleman who sits behind him, because, of course, they left the Scottish Parliament to come to this Parliament. But even with that in mind, and I add that in purely for information, he's entirely entitled to raise any issue he wishes to raise, whether it's devolved or reserved. But I do come back to the point. He gave up a seat in a devolved legislature to come to this place, to hold this government accountable. But he does a job for his constituents, and he's entirely right to do that. But I come to the tone of how we have these arguments, because some of the things that the honourable gentleman from Stirling raised earlier, yes, they were uncomfortable to listen to. Indeed, the banner he mentions, the Tories Come Out banner, is an uncomfortable banner to see anyone on my side of the constitutional question hold up, far less march behind, and do so with any sense of pride. I don't think Tories are scum. I think lots of their policies are terrible policies. I'll argue against them. I'll fight against them at election time. Ultimately, I'll argue for the ultimate salvation from them, which I believe to be Scottish independence. But we need to get better at disagreeing with one another. I'd certainly give way.
Once again, I would like to commend the honourable gentleman for his spirited defence of democracy in this context. But why was it that the MSPs for the constituency of Stirling and for Dunblane, I forget the name of the seat, Dunblane, Clackmannanshire, why did they not join the honourable gentleman in condemning that banner when they were actually at the march behind it. It just doesn't make sense to me. This is where this disjoint occurs.
Perhaps I can help the honourable gentleman. And I know he believes what I'm saying to be sincere. I don't believe any of them had their picture taken with this. And indeed, this was a march, Mr Deputy Speaker, of many, many thousands of people. I only wish more people would have moved to get them out, which I understand some people did, and I certainly hope they don't turn up again. But he's going to have to raise with individual people what they're doing. But I see you're getting anxious, Mr Deputy Speaker, so I want to draw I want to draw this to a conclusion. Although the union is clearly important to many people, not just in this House, but right across the United Kingdom, I'm afraid to say this has been a very small subject for debate. Opposition parties regularly table debates on various hobby horse issues. That's what opposition parties do. We're supposed to expect a bit more from the government. At a time with such threats to international peace, international order, the rules-based system that the Prime Minister regularly stands at that dispatch box and talks about, and which I regularly find myself in agreement with. At a time when the far right are on the rise in fundraising and organising to displace moderate, centre-left, centre-ground people right across Europe, at a time when fascists and racists are now no longer embarrassed to be a fascist or a racist, they're shaking off those cloaks that we have made them wear for many decades. This is what the government wants to bring forward for debate. It really is small. I accept the union's important. Of course it's important. I grew up in a heavily unionist household. Indeed, my own father will watch this speech and tell me I was talking a load of rubbish, quite possibly. He's right, he's right. And I make no observation other than that. But I'm afraid the world is bigger than Scotland, it's bigger than Britain, and it's a dangerous time out there. And the fact that the government have chosen to lodge a debate like this, which is frankly a university debating society issue at this moment in time, this is supposed to be a legislature. We are here to legislate and hold this government accountable, and the government has utterly shirked that in tabling this evening.
Jim Shannon.